And basically,
well, actually, that's a nice segue into,
yes,
because mysticism, that seems like that could mean lots of different things. So one of the things I definitely wanted to sort of, unlayer the onion of mysticism, as it were. And so maybe it's some way we can weave into that, because I think that's a really fascinating topic of conversation.
Yeah, I'm really happy to try and open up that word, because I think that it's a word that has a lot of potential as a word and as a label. I think it's a word that also has a tremendous amount of misunderstanding. There's a joke in the field that there are as many definitions of mysticism as there are scholars of mysticism. There's now a new tendency in the past decade or two to reject the label as a whole. And that's move away from universal conceptions to particularity, which has importance. I'll give you.
Actually, there's probably some parallels there with psychology in my field.
Yes.
Figure out what it was, and then screw it. It's a word, you'll never define it.
That's right. I think there are a lot of parallels here, and I think that when we try to define things as broad, they become sometimes a weight around our neck, and sometimes we just want to throw them away. But I think the quest that you were after of what is psychology and what really grounds it metaphysically, what's really going on here, for me is also very important with mysticism, and I'm not willing to let go of the word, because I think that there is a truth that lurks behind the word, which is worth hanging on to.
All right. Can you share a little bit about how that unfolded and that journey? And that, I'm curious, I know what you've said in relation, but I'm really curious for us to dive into that truth.
Yeah. So I think part of the challenge with articulating it is that classically one of the trademarks of mysticism, and this goes back to William James and others, is that it is ineffable. It's that which cannot be spoken. And sometimes when it comes to defining things, we're less apt as humans to be able to give exact descriptions of a thing. But when we see it, we know it, right? And I feel like that's often the case with mysticism. But being that we are here to talk and to use our words constructively, we can talk a bit about definitions that have been shared, and one particular definition that I've gravitated towards because I think it's very helpful. A definition that's been given, one which I like a lot, from Evelyn Underhill. She was a great Anglican scholar of Christian mysticism. She wrote a book called Mysticism, which is charting the journey of the individual mystic through the dark night of the soul. A very fascinating early work on mysticism. A field which a lot of women scholars play an important role in developing, which is quite interesting. Grace Jansen, Evelyn Underhill, among others. She writes that mysticism is the art of union with reality, or unity with reality, the art of uniting with reality, which is really well worded, a really scholarly. It's a beautiful wording as well, but it's really carefully worded. That it's an art. It's about uniting, and the thing which we are trying to unite with is with reality itself. Wow. That's Underhill's. That's her one line. Most scholars, when they talk about mysticism today, they talk about the perceived experience of the individual. Actually,
let's just pause with that, because I think you're absolutely right. That just struck. I just felt that, actually. I felt that definition. I hadn't heard you exactly phrase it that way, and it hit me. The art of uniting with reality. That's a very, very, and I would think, and I had to learn this because, I come from the science side of the equation and everything. You hear the term mystic, it's almost the exact opposite that you can kind of, it's like the word metaphysics. I always used to associate the word metaphysics with all this, woo or whatever, right? And then it's like, actually, fundamentally, it's the conforming of the self to reality at its most fundamental, non-dual, unifying place, and to do it in being itself and the art of being itself in a particular way. And that's like, talk about like that, instead of going up, talk like kind of going down, that's amazingly cool in terms of that frame. So I just wanted to hold that for a second, because I can appreciate and taste the beauty of that.
Yeah, I think I've also become so we become immune to our own words sometimes, and I'm so often sharing these definitions that I don't stop to allow them to really hit me the way they did the first time. And definitely when I read that the first time, it just hit me so strong, which is why it sunk itself into my consciousness. And I've read hundreds of definitions, and the beauty of it and the conciseness of it, and that point exactly, that it's not about escapism, right? I think we use these words particularly in this particular way. We talk about spirituality or a spiritual quest as something which is opposed to materialism, spirit, matter. That's the original binary, and mysticism in in Underhill's phraseology and others, is not about spiritual. It's not about running away to the top of the mountain. It's about uniting. It's about coming to reality in its realest and deepest, which is why so often a lot of my work is actually just crusading against the overemphasis on experience, on transcendence, on the escape, which is part of the galaxy of mysticism. But it's not, mysticism is about coming back down, it's about integrating, is about getting beyond any of those binaries and separations.
Wow.
So I appreciate you stopping to pay attention to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just, I guess I was tasting it like you did for the first time, and I just wanted to, to honor that. So thank you for sharing that, because it definitely, it hits me in a particular kind of way that opens and pulls me. So that's cool.
It's really good. I'm really glad to hear. Yeah. The second definition, which I like to share following Underhill's, is more from a more recent scholar, which is slightly less poetic, but a bit more fleshed out and really encapsulates the field well, I think. So this is from Peter Moore, M-O-O-R-E. He writes that mysticism is three things. He says, bracketing two other things, which is the ontological claim and the sociological sort of study of it.
Okay.
It's these three things. It's the experiences, I should say, plural, theories and practices of unity. So unit of experiences, unit of theories, and unit of practices. And it's such a great framing, and I'm happy to get into all of his categories.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, I always talk about theory, practice, and research, and really, sort of the empirical, and you can define empirical a lot of different ways. And then, the embodied in practice, and then the theoretical, conceptual, description, explanation. It sounds immediately like there's some real parallels there. And then to, coalesce that, bracket the sociological and the ontological, and then bring that together. That's fascinating. That's another beautiful definition. And the other thing, of course, that I saw with you that I hadn't appreciated at all is just how foundational this issue of observer, non-dual unity is with reality in a particular way in mysticism. I just said somehow I'd missed that fact. And so here's another, echo of that with more richness and facets to it in a particular kind of sort of intellectualized way. But that's great.
Yeah. I think it's really, it's not just a good definition, it's a powerful definition in that it allows us to then examine things through that three-part rubric, and see it in that way. It's really a powerful tool. And there's a lot more details about what are the varieties of experience, what are the varieties of theories, and what are the varieties of practices. And he splits them into a few categories, which we can share. But that notion that that unity is really central, that the central metaphysical, epistemological, and ethical proposition of the mystic across cultures and across ages is this realization of the fundamental unity, interconnectedness, interdependence, or non-duality, constitutional to reality. Sometimes we often speak about it as the breakdown of the subject-object dichotomy, which is our most basic dichotomy. What we talk about sometimes in terms of psychology as an ego death, where the sense of separate self falls away. We feel one with all of existence. There's in Christian mysticism, we talk about a term called unio mystica, the mystical union with the divine. In Jewish mysticism, we talk about dveikut, is typically the term, the cleaving, the clinging, the uniting with God. In Islam, we talk about fana, the annihilation, which leads to baka, to standing with God. So this is really, I think, when I think about mysticism, I think about it predominantly as this exploration of unity, which is obviously where the name of the channel comes from. There are people, to be fair, scholars and historians who define mysticism otherwise, and that's an ongoing conversation, and I'm not trying to close out any of that, but this is simply where I feel guided by the research and by the data.
Super resonant, man, in terms of, both just the disclaimer, because I always do that with psychology. You try to create a definition and then you get institutional, like who owns stuff, right? And they have to be, so I appreciate that. And it's an important, it's not just a caveat, but, and at the same time, if you're going to then grab a hold and make some claim.